Next up, we have Speeding Up Media Upload with Matt Dorman. Matt is a co-founder of Endeavor and has been building websites since 1995. He's worked on all kinds of sites from high-profile companies, maybe you've heard of them, Time, Johnson & Johnson, Fox News, just to name a few. Matt's one of our Colorado locals with his wife and two boys. So welcome, Matt, and take it away.
All right, thanks a lot. So quick to talk about the company real quick, just so you know who we are and why I'm here. We started the company about 5 years ago, and I moved out to Colorado at the same time. My partner runs the New York side of the business, and I try to run the Colorado side. We're a distributed company. We're purely focused on technology, and within that, we're really focused on WordPress exclusively. So my background, I've done quite a bit of Drupal. Good amount of WordPress at this point. I started doing WordPress before we started Endeavor, but I've done a lot of enterprise closed source CMSs before that, with some overlap, but I've been really focused in open source for good 13 or 12 years now of my career. Do have a Bachelor of Science, so I'm somewhat technical. That changes every year because everything changes, as we know. There's my LinkedIn profile, and I got the pictures of the dogs because they are with me physically at the moment to keep them from barking at UPS and FedEx and everything else. So, although I'm not giving them pizza right now. So let's talk about the talk. So part of this talk, we're going to go through the WordPress media upload process, the actual, what's happening in the background, because whether you're a developer or you're, an editor, you may not even know what's kind of happening in the background. So we'll go through that, see some bottlenecks and things like that. We'll talk about some partial solutions and recommendations, kind of the easy ways of fixing some things that we found. Go through a couple of plugins that are out there, very popular plugins, and kind of talk about what they do and what they're not doing. And then go through a demo of just showing what happens to, especially since we're in the developer track. Maybe you're not editors, or you're not using the editorial system. You don't realize that it takes so long to upload these images, and the detriment to some of their days when they're waiting for things. Talk about quote unquote our solution. It's on GitHub, and we'll go through that as well. It's something that we've been building over the past few years, or ideas around it, and then more the last few months to talk about something that we think is a really good way of doing this. And then next steps around that solution, but others as well. And of course, questions at the end. So what happens when you upload an image or assets to WordPress? So you obviously upload a file, right? And WordPress is going to take, error, right? That happens sometimes. Well, let's try again as an editor. So we upload the file. So the first thing that happens on WordPress is it has to figure out what this file is, because WordPress is a media management, so it's not just images. In this case, this talk is all about images, but WordPress is going to take a look at the file. Is it a PDF? Is it a Word doc, perhaps, or a video? If it's an image, what type of an image? JPEG, PNG, GIF, all things like that. And then, of course, the size. So that's being done in PHP, and it figures all that out for you. And then the next step is what happens is that WordPress has to generate all these image sizes. Just if you do core without a really highly customized theme, it's going to generate probably 5 or 6, I think, at this point, maybe 7, just core images. So thumbnail, there's a medium, there's full is the actual, and there's a couple of new ones that we'll get into in a little bit. So it's going to do that, and it's going to keep doing it over and over, one at a time, because we're in PHP land, so it's all synchronous. And by the time it finishes, it's going to error out again. Not all the time. Obviously, this is the worst case scenario, but this happens. And a lot of times what happens at this point is that they'll get the HTTP error, or they'll get really nothing. So the editor will have no idea what happened. They'll be partially in the system. They'll be on the file server, but they'll not be in the database. All kinds of fun things. So what happens when it's actually successful, right? So it's going to do those steps. It's going to go recursively through the image generation. The next step is that it's going to attach. So it's going to create a post in the post table called it's an attachment type. In there, it's going to be the location, the physical location of the file, the URL actually for the slug, the author, the person that uploaded it, the the date, the IP address, the basic stuff. So it's going to put that in there. And then the next part, it's going to actually add, sorry, I'll go back. Post meta. So post meta gets one entry as well. And inside of that is all these image sizes. So if it's 7, it's going to put all those image sizes, the URLs of each, or the names of each one of those, and the physical sizes, the dimensions of it. If it's 20 or 50, they're all going to go in that one place. So it's all stored there, right? And that's all fast. Once it gets past the image generation, these two are very fast. And then the next, of course, they get a success message, they see the image, and they go about their day. Maybe they uploaded 1, maybe they uploaded 20, but that's basically the process, right? So where is the problem? Well, it's pretty easy to identify the slowest part is where the image sizes get generated. And in that part, as I mentioned before, it could error out, and then you've got basically orphaned images on the file server. It could have missed some of those images. It could have done them incorrectly. All kinds of things can happen, and if they can, they will, obviously, in our world. So, yeah, there's my arrow. So what are some partial solutions to this? We found first thing you can do, and this is across the board, right? If you have any performance issues, if you have any site issues, a good audit of your site is going to be a good idea. And there's a specific way that you can audit the image sizes. It's not as cumbersome as it sounds, the word audit. I'll show you how to do that. The next thing is, so you audit it. Well, you want to re-review those site images, and that's not an oops. And again, I'll show you why you want to do that, because obviously things can get added later. The next potential step is after you've seen this whole list of images and seen what they are, and actually done a real audit of, oh, do I need all these? You can start to remove some of those unused images. And that could mean removing plugins, or there's simpler ways of just removing the images and keeping the plugin functionality. And then the last easy way is to modify those unused images, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. So how do we find image sizes? How do we start an audit? Well, if you have access to WP-CLI, which if you're running locally, you definitely should be able to do this. You can run WP media image size, and that'll output something like this. So this is actually our marketing site. We like to throw themes in the marketing site and try to build with those themes a lot. So we get a lot of good examples of things like this, that there's lots of images that we wouldn't need, and we get to debug things. That's why we're a technical firm, because for some reason this interests us. There's 2 items in here, and we'll take a look at these two later, but these are actually in core. But so that's easy if you have WP-CLI. If you don't have access to the CLI or command line for whatever reason, your host or you're just running it on a host, and you can actually paste in some PHP. And this is pretty easily available. I mean, the slides are going to be available later, but this code is pretty easily available if you search for it. It's essentially getting the global variable and outputting the data in there. And you're going to get all the images that are available on the system. Not quite as much information here on the left or on the right side versus the left. But you'll at least get an idea of, do I have 10 images or do I have 100 for some reason? And that's actually possible. So why did I say re-review? The obvious answer is because you added a plugin, right? And of course you want to re-review things, or you added some custom functionality in your theme. But maybe you just did a core update, and you would think, well, why would core add new images? Well, with 5.3, they did a lot of image updates. And in part of that, they actually added some extra image sizes, larger sizes to the mix, to improve the usability, or the display of some sites. Well, that's fine if you're just using an out-of-the-box theme, and you get those benefits, and that's great. If you're using a custom theme, or you've customized, even an out-of-the-box theme, and you know exactly what images you want, this may not be that necessary or beneficial. In our case, we've actually had a client. So we upgraded core, and nothing happened. Everything was fine. We've tested everything, and then all of a sudden they started getting those HTTP errors out of the blue, and they're like, "Well, what's going on? Like, we just updated core, and this wasn't just 5.3. This was a couple of 5.3.1 or something like that. So after some of the bugs were ironed out, and what we found was that put them over the threshold. And who knew? I mean, they're a significant site on good hardware, but it was just taking that much longer to generate that larger image. So we're able to remove those for them, and we apply those to all of our sites, because all of our sites aren't just using out-of-the-box themes. The other, like I was saying before, the other way of adding extra image sizes is adding a plugin. Generally, they're helpful. In this case, this plugin, and I'm not going to say that it's good or bad, it's an interesting plugin. We thought we were going to use it for some really good functionality. There were other performance issues, and I just happened to have it on my local when I was doing a search for add image size, and I happened to see, well, it was also adding a ton of image, or would have added a ton of image sizes if we had gone even further. And in this case, right off the top, I can see that 100 by 100 size. That's essentially thumbnail. Thumbnail is 150 by 150. Do I really need to bring it down to 100 by 100? Is that much? So I want to show you how to fix that if you did need to create or add a add a plugin, something like this. So how do we remove the image sizes? This is the easiest way, and this is actual code that we've pasted into a number of our sites. You'd basically just use that string of the image name before, and you do remove image size, and you do add it to the right filter or the right time, or just add it to your functions file. That's obviously the easiest way if you add a bunch of stuff in there. But that'll eliminate it from being processed, and also eliminate it from potentially trying to be used from the front end. So very easy, and you don't have. It's not just to core. This can be applied to other plugin files. Potentially your theme, if you're using another theme and like trying to do a child theme or something like that, you could remove sizes from a theme as well. And then the other kind of easy way of tuning up your images is to what I was saying before, to modify that. So the example was that plugin that was adding an image that was 100 by 100, right? Well, I already know that a thumbnail is 150 by 150. Why would I do that? But in this case, maybe I also don't want to have both thumbnail and medium, which are core sizes. The top method is what you'll find if you search this, or at least what I found. And it works. What it's doing is basically updating the width and the height of thumbnail to the width and the height of medium. And this actually doesn't help. Well, so this method of updating the option, it doesn't help with the processing time, because it's still going to create and I don't know the order exactly, but it'll still create the thumbnail, and then it's going to create the medium image, but it's going to create the exact same file name. So it'll just overwrite itself. So that helps with disk space, and that's, with a lot of hosts, that actually could be a big deal if you're running a big, not even a big site, but one with like a lot of slideshows or a lot of images in general. So that could help quite a bit. But the secondary method is the exact same thing. It's a lot more code. But if you look at this closely or understand this, it's actually doing an update to the options table twice, and it would do this for every page load forever. So like I said, it does work, and it does it at the right time, but it's actually going to create a lot of overhead. So by updating the options table, you're clearing caches. You actually it needs to get these values a lot, so it's actually doing a lot of performance hit by doing that. So another method, if you want to do it just in code, would be to get the values, check the values. Are they already equal? That's what this. Oops. I went too far. It'll check the values, and then it does the update. So it'll only do it one time that way. And then at this point, you could actually delete this code, because again, it only needs to set this value one time. So this would be a way to do it in code. Another way, you could just edit the database. You could edit via WP CLI commands, but these are kind of the simplest ways of doing it. And again, it only helps the file or the disk space issues. All right, so what about these other plugins, right? There's a ton of image plugins out there, and there's more than this. These are ones that I have experience using, and they all work, and they all do what they say they're going to do. In fact, they all do what they say to do for very large sites, even so, small or large. Some of them have costs associated with them. So Smoosh and Imagify, kind of, in my opinion, kind of do the same type of thing. They are optimizing your images on their servers, but they're going to send them back. So they'll clean them up, they'll make them smaller, they'll do some really great things for performance, but they're going to essentially send them back to you to host off your server. WP Media Offload and S3 Uploads, they're doing kind of a similar approach. So if you use these two together, you could potentially do what our plugin is doing somewhat. But so these will send them to S3. You can use, I'm not sure why I'm blanking at the moment, but a few other hosting services off your infrastructure. So that would help with disk sizes, disk space, obviously. And then the fifth one is Jetpack. Jetpack has a ton of functionality, right? But it does have some image optimization functionality, and it changes all the time. So the last time I used it for image optimization, it was doing basically allowing you to have a CDN out of the box, the WordPress.org CDN. So great, fast. It would provide some optimization with that CDN. It would provide some image sizing with that CDN, so dynamic sizing. So some really great things for performance. It is a large plugin, and they've improved it quite a bit over the past. But at some points, even when they do updates, it's going to hit some performance issues if you're using a lot of the functionality. But it does provide, some good image optimization functionality. So get into a quick demo, and I mentioned before we started, I don't do true live demos, so I'm going to play this. And so what we're going to see here is a demo of, this site has 16 image sizes, so a certain amount of core and a certain amount in the theme, and a few of the plugins that were updated. And it's going to go through the process of an editor, right? So an editor's coming into their daily work, they're going to add new, they're going to select files, they're going to select this file, and this happens to be throughout their magazine. They're going to sit here, so they uploaded it, right? And now we get to wait. Try not to have too much dead air, so we're going to draw some infinity signs. And this is really only 16 images. And the other part is that this is a dev server with no external traffic. It's got good hardware around it. So this is a pretty typical wait, right, for an image. Finally, it's here. I can click on it. I can see that it was a 1 meg file. 2500 by 2500, which is about the upper limit, but a lot of images get sent there. So I'm going to sort this, and this isn't using S3 as a backend. So I sorted it by date just so we can see. So 15 seconds is when it started, and 34 is when it ended. So that was, 19 seconds, about a second per image. It obviously takes a little time to upload the first one and then figure out what it is. But about 19 seconds to do all that, right? Well, what if we offload that process? In this case, this will be the best case scenario because this is offloading using our process, and it's going to be able to parallel or asynchronously do those, but I can show that in a bit as well. So same server, same image. I deleted the other one. We're going to go and check out S3 just so you can see that it's already empty. No magic is going on. I'm going to go and enable the offload media, and actually I already did it, but for the demo, we've got some settings in there that I'll go through in the code in a little while. So go back to media and go add new, and select files in the same exact file, and then we'll wait for that to happen. So, well, they have to wait, and they think, well, I'm going to wait for 19, 20 seconds or whatever, and well, it took a little while, but it's already in there. It's the same image size. Go to S3, we can look at that, and we can actually see the times that it took. So at 51 seconds it started. There's a little bit of a time gap, and I'll explain that. So it took 5 seconds to get that first start, but all of them happened in a second. And then the 300 by 300 is the one that kind of took a little while for it to kick off, because that's the one I had the server generate, and that's this one. So obviously we can see some benefits to offloading these types of images. So what is going on in this plugin? So same process, right? We still have to upload a file. We still have to extract the image. So WordPress is still doing its thing. In this case, it's going to generate, in the example that I showed, it generated one, but the plugin actually has options to generate as many as you want on the server, or even 0 to make it even faster. What it does is it actually sends off a a request to Lambda and sends the image. Well, in this case, it already has it since it's in S3 for our instance, but it sends it over to AWS to get processed. So a Lambda function triggers, in this case, I think it was like 12 Lambda functions. They're all going to happen in parallel, and they all come back. And the top is WordPress continues along. So this request happens asynchronously. It does not wait for it. So it can happen completely different. So the post gets created, the meta gets added, but it's only getting the value of the one image size at this point. And then it's a success to the author. They see the image, they can go about their day, because the reality is they're not going to immediately be publishing articles for instantly people seeing them. So along the bottom, which it's going to send a REST request back to WordPress. It's going to then look at the request and say, all right, I need to generate all these images in the post meta table. And we can go through the code for all this, obviously. And then there's a success. So what would be the limitations for a process like this, right? So it's still having to wait for WordPress initially. So you still have a couple of seconds. If you really wanted to improve it, you could pretty much take over the media upload, but that piece of WordPress is, so the other part is, I've done a lot of Drupal development, and they're still working on the media upload, getting that really well. The media upload in WordPress is really nice. It's really good as far as a lot of CMSs I've ever worked with. So this is just a piece that we felt like we could improve. So we don't want to actually take over. We wouldn't want to take over the initial process, because we think everything else handles it really well. The parallel resizing could fail. So in that step, that is a completely autonomous and parallel track that the AWS is handling. So the author or the editor doesn't get a notification right now with the code that we have live. We've actually never seen it fail, but obviously if it can, it will. So it's probably less likely than the other ones, but we'll probably want to put something in at some point. The biggest limitation is it relies on AWS. So this is not a drop the plugin in and then all my problems go away type of approach, right? You would have to take the AWS code, the Lambda code that we have in the GitHub repository, spin up your own, and then point to it. But there's some decent documentation around it. But it's available, and it could be done fairly easily. Just one more thing to manage at this point. And we don't have a paid version of this plugin, so we have no hosting abilities. So I think, let me look at the time. Yeah, we got plenty of time to go through this. Oops. So I'll make this. So this one is the WordPress plugin. So this is going to be all PHP, and I'm probably not going to go through the Lambda function, at least very much in a lot of specifics. It's available, and you can actually take a look and ask me questions. It's just that it's in Node, and I'm learning Node myself for the most part. So so this is a pretty standard plugin. We've got an index.php file here that's pretty much just calling in other files. Nothing really special here. All the stuff goes on in our Inc folder. So we have a CLI file here, but that was really for debugging. So we wrote, as I was saying before, we've written this functionality for other sites that we manage, but we didn't, until this plugin, we hadn't built it in a way that could be used across different sites. So this was an attempt, and we've deployed it, but we had some bugs initially, and we were using the CLI commands to help debug it, basically. So that file might go away in the future. So the class attachments is where the bulk of the work happens, but the class settings is that settings screen that we saw before. So this is where the API key is set or stored, if you're going to enable it or not. So one piece of functionality that we have added to this is the ability to disable the offloading. And you kind of ask, why would you ever want to do that? Well, this plugin, if you just enable the plugin itself and then go in and disable in the settings page, it will actually still asynchronously do the generation of the images. So the editor gets the same benefit of not having to wait for all of the images in their process. So So it'll send off a request to itself. So the server is still doing the generating and still getting the performance hit. And it's still going to take a good amount of time, but the editor, the person, isn't going to have to actually wait for it if you did this process. So that's kind of a nice benefit. We also added some functionality to, rather than having to do the remove the images, because we were already doing it in here, we added it as an option to basically select what image size you just don't want to generate at all. So it's a little bit easier that way too. So it's a couple out of the box pieces for the plugin, and it's not a whole lot of code to do that. Actually, there's no code to do that if you're just adding the plugin itself. So yeah, I'm not going to go through the settings really because it is pretty boring. It's just a standard settings page where it's storing values into the options table. So nothing special going on there. But in the attachments, I will walk you through that. If you can remember that visual walkthrough, and I'll step through it. So what'll happen, my dog is snoring. I hope that's not getting picked up. The author uploads the image, WordPress processes it, nothing's happening there. But what'll happen next is that with a filter, we'll tell WordPress to not generate these images because we've already set up that we want those to be offloaded. So in this refine image sizes function, we're doing that. And so we've got a couple of functions. So we've got the offload image sizes and then the remove sizes. And this remove sizes is what I was talking about. We have a table or a select box of all image sizes that you would want to remove. You just select those and then they end up in here, obviously. And then the offload is another selection that you would do. So it gets those values, offloads, and gets the remove ones. And from that point, it returns sizes, which this is just a filter, a WordPress filter. So it now has a much reduced sizes array. And in fact, it could be totally empty. So that next step would be super fast for WordPress, and that's what makes it super fast because it looks and says, well, what do I generate? Well, I generate nothing. The next step inside of WordPress would be to, let me scroll to the top, to add attachment. So it wants to add the attachment to the post table. So that's an action that it can call, right? So when that happens, we're going to call our function to start generation, and that's where it triggers the request over to AWS. Perfect. And in that action, we just get the post ID, so we have to get a little bit of data from that point. So just some error checking or options checking to see if it's enabled. We then have to get the post because we just have the post ID, and the post is the attachment or an attachment type. So we check, is it an attachment? If it is, well, we're going to do all this. This is probably redundant since the hook is only for add attachment. I'm just realizing that now. But it's always safe to double check that you're doing the right type posts. We want to get the host name, and that's for, I need to tell AWS then where to request it from. So I need to get the host name of the WordPress server and send that over to AWS. So because this is set up to be able to, to use multiple sites, once you set up the Lambda, it doesn't have to be one site. I pass in the path, and this is the REST, the WordPress REST path that we have. So LMG. This used to be offline media generation. I think we've renamed it though. Actually, we didn't. Good. And then it's going to go through all the sizes and basically build up an array to send over to AWS. So that AWS, because AWS doesn't know at this point. Again, the Lambda function is built to do anything. If you looked at that code, this has to tell Lambda exactly what sizes to generate. And also, so the crop value, and this is a WordPress thing, how am I going to crop it? So you send that information over there, and then it can crop it exactly the way WordPress would have cropped it. But it needs to know which image sizes to do, and that's all that code's doing. And then it sends off a request, so a remote request here. If you look really closely, there's a blocking parameter set to false. And this, in WordPress, when you do the WP remote request, you could wait for the request to return. And that just makes, if you had to get a value from it or anything like that. But in this case, we're currently just trusting that it's going to return something valuable. And then, so that's if the API key, and again, that's what I was saying before. So if the API key is set, it'll do that. If not, it essentially sends a request to itself to trigger the REST API to then generate the sizes. So that's the bit of code that does that for us, and still blocking equals false for that. So when it comes back, the controller, and so the controller, if you're familiar with the REST API at all, there's a lot of code that helps you set it up, and then you basically you can edit a few things to do your functionality. So a lot of this code is actually just setting up a REST class, essentially, and a controller. And a controller is how you get the URL. So when it hits the URL and it sends it to a function. And that's actually right in here where you register your route. So we are doing some permissions. We're doing very basic permissions. So there's the API key we send back and forth. So if the API key is good, then we're just kind of assuming that no one else has that value because it is a secret value. It doesn't have to be authenticated or anything complicated like that. But what it's doing is it's calling, so the callback is this function down here. And if you look through it, most of this is just error checking and making sure, all right, the key is correct. Also, let's just make sure that the attachment ID exists, and that's kind of valid as well as a double check. But then it's going to call update meta, and that's back in the attachments class. And this function is necessary because, like I was saying before, and I kind of glossed over it, the meta table update, the post meta update has all the image sizes. So if you had a 100 by 50 image, but the cropping was set so that it doesn't have to be, it's not a crop, it's just a resize, and the scale was 100 by 75, or actually 100 by 23, let's say. What the value that gets stored in this table is not 100 by 50, it's actually 100 by 27 or whatever I said. So we actually need those values from AWS. And that's why we have to have this functionality in here to then get that update from AWS. And so it sends over all the values. A lot of this is just formatting the data properly so that it can then put it into the table. The very bottom, and this is where when I said that the editor doesn't get notified of the error, but we actually have a fail-safe. Just double checking. So the underscore WP make subsizes, probably not a well-documented or known function, but it will actually evaluate to see if there's any missing images, and then it will generate them for you. So if AWS failed for whatever reason, but it did send over the values, it will then pick them up, or maybe the values just got lost. And this is where also what we're using when we say, go ahead and update the images after the fact on WordPress and don't use AWS at all. So it's a nice little piece of functionality. It generates the table and everything for you.
We've got about a minute left.
And yep, perfect. Actually, I don't know how I wrapped up that perfectly. So I am done with the coding part. I'm happy to go into questions and answers at this point.
All right. First question we have is, how many image sizes should I have on a site? Is it really just disk space file count thing that means too many, or other downsides?
Yeah, it is. So, well, as many as you need is I guess the correct answer. But that could be 10, it could be 100, depending on the real requirements of the site. It really shouldn't be 100, but some sites are like that. You have to take into consideration how much file or disk space you have. Sometimes, like if you're using S3, that really isn't an issue anymore necessarily, but there's management issues around that. So even if you're using S3, you still have to have some type of backups and local development and all those things. So trying to limit it as best as possible. And then the other part is, if you're over from what I found, if you're over the 30 mark or so, and it depends on the sizes that you're using, you're probably going to have a lot of errors on uploading without some type of functionality like this on almost any host.
Got it. Well, that's all we have time for this
Oh,
talk. Thank you for your demo, Matt.